Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad Tehami. As we speak, it's been 46 days that the Israeli naked aggression was unleashed on the innocent people of Gaza. Despite international calls for an immediate ceasefire, Israeli aggression continues with relentless, disproportionate and indiscriminate bombardment on the innocent and unarmed civilians of the Gaza Strip. As a result of which, more than 13,300 people have been killed, including 5,600 children. As per some media reports, the head of political bureau of Hamas resistance group has said, let me quote him, that we are close to reaching a deal on truce, unquote. On the other hand, very different sort of statements coming, especially when we talk about Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who says we will not stop fighting until we bring our hostages home. Meanwhile, ministers of Muslim countries are actively engaged in a diplomatic push for an immediate ceasefire and a sustained and smooth flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. A ministerial committee mandated by Joint Arab Islamic Extraordinary Summit headed by Saudi Minister for Foreign Affairs met with Chinese Vice President Mr. Han Zheng and Chinese Foreign Minister Mr. Wang Yi. Now, the ministers have stressed the need for the international community to fulfill its responsibility, especially the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, and take action to halt the flagrant Israeli violations of international laws and international humanitarian law. For his part, Chinese Foreign Minister Mr. Wang Yi has said, let me quote him, that China always firmly supported the just cause of the Palestinian people to restore their legitimate national interests and rights, unquote. Mr. Han Zheng, on his part, has emphasized China's support for joint ministerial committee that emanated from this joint Arab Islamic summit. At the same time, a major development, an extraordinary meeting of the BRICS was also held virtually, at which Chinese President Mr. Xi Jinping has presented 3 proposals for the lasting peace in the Middle East. They include an urgent call for the ceasefire and release of the civilian detainees, as well as he has said that it is imperative to ensure safe and smooth passage of humanitarian relief, and he's also at the same time urged the international community to take concrete action to prevent this particular escalation. During this particular virtual meeting of the BRICS regarding the Israeli-Palestinian situation, Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has urged all the nations to cease weapon exports to Israel. In today's program, we are going to take all these aspects up for discussion. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Ms. Naela Chohan, former ambassador. Ms. Naela, thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. We really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Mr. Jawad Salim, his former Foreign Secretary of Pakistan. Mr. Jawad, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. At the same time, on Skype, we are being joined by Ms. Zoon Ahmed Khan, Research Fellow at Center for China and Globalization. Ms. Zoon, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Ms. Naela, with this particular statement by the head of the Political Bureau of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, that we are close to reaching a deal on truce. What's expected out of it? Do you expect that both the sides, if agree to this particular truce, is it going to be sustainable, and what is the likelihood of the exchange of the detainees or the hostages which Hamas captured, and also the prisoners which Israel has of the Palestinian origin?
Too many questions in one question. It's rather early to predict what will come out of it. It's very fluid right now. Until the deal is done, it's not done. And both sides have said that, the Israeli side and the Palestinian side. What will be the modalities? I suppose at this moment the pressure on Netanyahu regime by the families of hostages is overwhelming for him, because he is also going into elections. So they are, thinking, because even in Israel, their people are saying that the Netanyahu regime has given priority to war than to saving the hostages. So that is a very negative blemish on Netanyahu. When it comes to Hamas, whatever hostages they released earlier on also had very good words for Hamas. They said that they were taken care of, that the Hamas were gentle with them, elderly people, they were caring for them. So this really puts Israel in a spot. But the truce itself, what will be the dynamics? They have 46 hostages at this moment. How many have they?
240 around. 4 of them were released earlier.
4 were released earlier, but there are thousands of Palestinians in Israeli jails. I suppose the initial exchange would be on the Hamas leadership that is taken by the Israelis vis-a-vis the hostages that Hamas has taken. I think that would be the first step in this. And then how durable or sustainable it will be, it remains to be seen, because the agenda here of the Israelis is to basically occupy Gaza. And they are pushing all these Palestinians towards Sinai. First they were saying, you know, south, now they're pushing them forward. And perhaps this is one of the reasons that, as you just mentioned, that some of the ministers of Muslim countries, Arab countries, have made a group and they have called on the Chinese foreign minister. They are going to meet all the P5 to create that pressure on them. Similarly, so there are multifaceted pressures right now.
Very important thing at the last that you've just mentioned. I'll go into further detail, taking your detailed view regarding how important and crucial is that diplomatic push on the part of the Muslim countries that has been mandated by the Joint Arab-Islamic Summit, which has already met the Chinese officials, intends to meet the officials of the other P5 also. Mr. Jawad, now what are your expectations by looking at this statement by Mr. Ismail Haniyeh? Now what could be the possible modalities of this particular truce if initially it is reached? Will it be focusing on the exchange of those hostages kept by Hamas and some of the prisoners from the Palestinian side? And would it also lead to a kind of smooth and sustained humanitarian aid into Gaza Strip?
As Ambassador Chohan has mentioned, I think it's very important that this first step is taken. And it's very positive that there are indications that the back-channel negotiations are close to some sort of fruition, because ceasefire or humanitarian pause, as some European countries have been calling it, is the need of the hour. And from there, then you could go on to the next steps. It's very clear that, you know, this is about the hostages, because for Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, who always posed as a very strong Prime Minister, this was a policy failure. The 7th October action by Hamas, which Israeli security forces could not defend. And subsequently has been trying to prove that he still retains the capacity and capability to protect Israelis. Lately there has been great pressure on him by the families of the hostages and Israeli media, and of course, you know, the human rights, whatever human rights groups exist there, to endeavor to free the hostages. And obviously this was a trump card which the Palestinians held, as per many analysts. So if there is some ceasefire or pause in this indiscriminate bombing that is happening, which was literally a massacre that we have all witnessed, that would be a good first step. Parallel to that, I think the endeavors of the Muslim countries in particular, and many other international actors, I would particularly mention China. Russians have also been calling for that. And this initiative that has been launched by Foreign Minister Faisal bin Farhan, whom I had the pleasure of knowing, because he was earlier Saudi Arabia's former ambassador to Germany when I was ambassador to Germany as well. So I think he has taken a great initiative. I had been calling for that. I had been, in my previous comments in this and other programs, have been saying that it's very important that the Muslim countries, they coordinate and they organize their endeavors in a way that they could put maximum pressure on the Western countries and indirectly upon Israel. And this initiative, whereby they'd be meeting the 5 permanent members, and they have already met the Chinese leaders, including the Chinese Vice Premier and the Foreign Minister. I think it's a very good first step. They'll be meeting other members, leaders of the P5 countries such as Russia. And in anticipation of that, the Russians have come up with some good statements. President Putin has mentioned that in the next G20, which would be held virtually, he would be calling upon for ceasefire and for a dialogue to accelerate the process for a 2-state solution. So I think these are all good signs. But we have to see, because like they say, there's many a slip between the cup and the lip. So we have to see what comes out of this negotiated back-channel diplomacy.
So what's your understanding, if we try to take an analysis of this particular statement by Benjamin Netanyahu, that we will not stop fighting until we bring our hostages home? As per some media reports, not all of the hostages which have been detained by Hamas are going to be released initially. Of course, there is going to be a number, but not all of them. So do you think by looking at this statement, it shows whether initially, if the Israeli authorities agree to this particular truce, they are going to return to indiscriminate bombardment again on the Gaza Strip?
Now, these are maximalist positions that the parties take in such conflicts. It's nothing unusual. And as I said before, Netanyahu in particular always tries to portray as a very strong leader. So I'm not surprised by such rhetoric from him. But having stated that, when you negotiate, there has to be some give and take. There has to be some compromise. So what comes out of these back-channel negotiations could be quite different to what he's saying now.
Right. Let me proceed towards Ms. Zoon. Ms. Zoon, what's your understanding when we talk about this particular truce that's been talked about by the head of the political bureau of Hamas, Mr. Ismail Haniyeh? Now, not, of course, all of the hostages which have been detained by Hamas since 7th of October are going to be released. Some of them, of course, if it happens and this particular truce is finally agreed upon, what do you understand after that? And in different steps, if all of these hostages are released and go back to Israel, do you see any more aggression on the part of Israeli authorities once they have secured all those hostages being kept by Hamas at this point in history?
Thank you firstly for having me on the program. I think, of course, this is a relatively positive development that Hamas has offered some of the hostages in exchange for a ceasefire. But in my view, the real pressure that will come on the Netanyahu regime will be from their own people, which is happening, as both Ambassador Naela and Ambassador Jawad Tehami have also mentioned. I mean, there is growing pressure on the Netanyahu government to prioritize the safety of the hostages, which this blind bombardment of the Gaza Strip is not going to achieve. The second pressure will also come from the growing realization. It might be a slow process, but we do see that yesterday, for the first time, the BBC reports were critical of the evidence that Israel had offered to justify its attack on the Al-Shifa hospital. And that is a shift. We also see millions of people in Western countries demonstrating against the bombing, and people are openly calling this, maybe something close to even what we saw in history about the number of people. I mean, let me just be clear that the number of Gazans being killed today is the number of children in particular is higher than what was happening during the Holocaust. I mean, these are numbers that cannot be hidden. These are numbers that, as much as the Israeli government and its official representatives try and negate these numbers, there is enough of a backlash and enough of a mistrust by people around the world and by a predominant number of the world's leaders, which is going to result in a growing tension. So, what has, in my view, really happened in this entire scenario is a serious miscalculation of the degree to which Israeli propaganda could have convinced Western people and the world at large that what they're doing would be justifiable. The second miscalculation was also that we are seeing the domestic propaganda, and as Ambassador Johar correctly mentioned, this is a maximalist position, but also some of the very unfortunately genocidal wording by local leaders to the Israeli people is coming out in the mainstream, and this is resulting in a situation where you see, maybe gradually Western leaders, people, the global community at large is going to increase its pressure on the Israeli government to push for a ceasefire. Now, the second thing, obviously, we are looking at the meetings, the meeting in Beijing. This is the first stop by what we call the Arab Islamic Extraordinary Summit. The aim, as you also mentioned, is to meet different members of the P5 and push.
I seek your pardon over here for the interjection over here. Before heading towards this particular very important meeting between Chinese officials and the Ministerial Committee of the Arab Islamic Summit, we'll definitely take your detailed view regarding that. Also, what has transpired primarily in that, when you talk about the pressure, the kind of pressure on Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, so one of those things that you've just mentioned is the pressure from the heirs or the families of the hostages of the Israeli origin. Now, there was a meeting between these heirs and the families and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. One of those people said that we wanted to hear about a deal and that return of the abductees is a priority among the war objectives. We didn't hear that. So what sort of an impact this particular pressure or the kind of resentment or the frustration that is developing with every single passing day because of this approach or the miscalculation of Benjamin Netanyahu would have on his future politics?
It's also important to note that there were massive protests in major cities of Israel against Benjamin Netanyahu because of some of the judicial reforms that he was conducting, and it was really seen as the end of his political career. A second criticism of Benjamin Netanyahu has been the radicalization of Israeli society, which many Israelis, many of us will follow voices from within Israel that are open in international media as well, that this radicalization is resulting in a situation that, to say the least, even if an average Israeli is not expected to empathize with the Palestinian or what they call Arab people, at least it is making Israel unsafe. So the criticism has been there for months now, since Benjamin Netanyahu, despite his growing unpopularity, to usurp as much power as possible. There were certain arguments within Israeli media as well and by global voices that are following the political situation that this has been a way for also Benjamin Netanyahu to divert the focus of the situation, because one of the biggest demonstrations in Israel was about to happen in Tel Aviv, was about to happen days after what we saw occurring on October the 7th. And then we know what followed after that. So the discontent with the Netanyahu administration has been growing. But at the same time, when you have this situation where, the attack that happened on Israeli people in the kibbutz, that also resulted in, for some people, a cry for revenge. So what we do see in Israel is two extremes within the society. We see, obviously, some of the settlers in the West Bank who are some of the most radicalized people as well. They would like to keep pushing. They will not accept a ceasefire. They have the same voice that we need to end the threat for sure. We have, again, extreme voices that are rewarded for being extremists within the Israeli administration that have a free hand to say whatever they want. And at the same time, we also have a pressure from a faction of Israeli society, be they the families of the hostages, be they those who have been critical of how Israel, the government has been handling the situation. So I think, it is not that simple to state which of these sides will be able to really be more effective. However, what we can say is that the discontent, the number of people that had that knee-jerk reaction of sheer revenge, may be decreasing. We also have evidence to suggest that the kind of blind support that Israeli had of Western governments, of key allies, is also, I mean, it is becoming an uncomfortable situation. And we also know that that a vast majority of the world's people, people in Western societies, as much as they might want to change the understanding of, they want to call these people 800,000 or millions of people overall protesting anti-Semitic. It is not the case. So I think that that breach of trust, that's happening between Western societies and their governments for supporting this slaughter of the people of Gaza is something that can result in also external pressure. So
Right.
and
Ms.
obviously
Noor,
diplomatic.
your point is well taken. I'll come back to you for your detailed view regarding what has transpired during the meetings of the Chinese officials with that particular ministerial committee of the Arab Islamic Summit. Now, Ms. Naela, as you already mentioned, that Israel is making strides to occupy Gaza and is pushing more and more Palestinians towards the Egyptian side, the Sinai Peninsula. Now, the first thing that comes to our mind is that do you think we've in the recent past seen the statements coming from the US administration, if the Israeli regime is going to make that move to completely occupy Gaza, do you think US administration is going to accept that?
Well, US government itself, you see the international dynamics are at this moment very fluid. US government is also in a difficult situation because they are also going into elections. So earlier on, I think President Biden was banking on his Jewish vote bank and therefore had made radical statements in favor of Israel. But with all these protests that Zoon was talking about, now they are under pressure because he realized that there is a larger number of people in the streets condemning the Israeli action. Consequently, the Biden administration is now under pressure also, and they started talking about humanitarian ceasefire. While supporting that this was Israel's self-defense, which is rejected in the UN, everybody condemned it. Nevertheless, this is the position they had taken, but they agreed to humanitarian pause or ceasefire. That is a positive step. How far will they go in it remains to be seen, because at this moment, as you saw in APEC summit, in which President Xi also had made his views clear to his counterpart President Biden, and then you see what happened in BRICS. You can see that now G20 is also coming. So there are so many pressures going on, and the most interesting I found was that the Chinese special envoy for Middle East is already doing backdoor negotiations between Hamas and the Israelis, and that is also a very important player in this whole thing. So how US can keep its superpower stature remains to be seen.
Right, Mr. Jawad, here is the scenario. When we talk about that resentment that is developing with every single passing day in the families of those hostages taken by Hamas, as I already mentioned, there was a meeting between those families and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, where they came out frustrated with not kind of response they were expecting. As Ms. Naela has already mentioned, that Israel is making strides to completely occupy Gaza. Now, there is another development that Hamas political bureau chief Ismail Haniyeh says that we are close to reaching an agreement or a deal on truce. What's going to be the future of Benjamin Netanyahu's politics within Israel if on one side, one after the other, by making small truces with passage of time and getting all those hostages released, at the same time pushing the Palestinians out of Gaza and being able to take a larger part of the territory in its own hands and annexes it with Israel. Do you think these are going to be two victories on the part of Israeli Prime Minister, and it could add to the benefit of once again winning the election?
Yeah, I think that is what he's been trying to do so far. First of all, to keep that pressure. As it has been mentioned that even before 7th October, he was under immense pressure because he was trying to usurp or expand his powers within Israel by certain judicial reforms, which were very unpopular, to say the least. And there were other things as well. And what happened on the 7th October really dented his reputation as a very strong leader who could protect the Israelis. So subsequent to that, all his endeavors have been to repair that damage, one, by doing what? Some of the actions that you've mentioned. We can debate on that, whether they want an occupation of Gaza or they want an administrative control of Gaza. But it's also clear that he wants to push the Palestinians either to the south, or I mean, the preference would have been to push them out to Sinai. But Egyptians and Jordanians have made it clear that, because they could see through his intention and his plans. So they have resisted that very strongly. So now the intention is to move them within the Gaza territory, or if some could leave as much as possible. On the other hand, this hostage crisis, this is going to be very important. How it plays out would determine his political future in the short term and perhaps even the medium term. We all have to recall what happened when President Jimmy Carter, when he had to deal with the 55 hostages which were held in Tehran by the students, the Iranian students, the US embassy staff there. In fact, as for many analysts, that was one of the big factors which led to his defeat in the next elections. So here we have a bigger number of hostages, and that too for a smaller country, a much smaller country in terms of population, Israel, rather than the US, which had a much, much bigger population. So I think this would be very important. And that is why, although on the face of it, he's making very strong statements and sort of all this rhetoric that we see, but as it's clear from Hania's statement, that in the back channel diplomacy, they're showing much more flexibility. So I think that is one thing which will play out. The other thing would be, I see all indications that Israel's target is to perhaps not to reoccupy Gaza, because there would be sort of, like many complications attached to that. But their target would be to ensure that Hamas is finished as a political entity and they do not have any control whatsoever or any influence whatsoever in the future Gaza, whatever is the shape of Gaza Strip, as a political reality. Now, how far they succeed in that remains to be seen, because Hamas has so far proven to be a much tougher nut to crack than what Netanyahu or others would have imagined. So this is all playing out now. These are all important actors. They are having a tussle. But the unfortunate reality is that the victims, the biggest victims, are the innocent Palestinians there. And that is what the world needs to impress upon Netanyahu, that okay, the games that you're playing for your political survival should not be at the cost of thousands upon thousands of innocent Palestinian lives.
Right, Mazoon, now going back to that very important, those important meetings held between Chinese officials and that ministerial committee headed by Saudi Foreign Minister Prince Faisal bin Farhan. Now, how much force do you think Chinese backing and Chinese official statements as far as their support towards the Muslim countries' position as far as the situation in Gaza is concerned, also urging for a ceasefire, immediate ceasefire, and a sustained and a smooth flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza is, and what sort of a lesson do you think is there after this backing by the Chinese officials to the Muslim countries for the Western countries, particularly the members of the P5?
Thank you for that question. I think I'll go back a few months from now. We all know that China, if people don't know, the Global Security Initiative, a vision to understand security as more of a collective threat and think about peaceful resolutions, was initiated, was announced by Xi Jinping in 2022 during the Boao Forum. Since then, what we have seen is the historic Saudi Arabia and Iran detente, a kind of political, resolution, a peace deal that was thought to be impossible. It is unprecedented. So in a way, China does have, till now, it is the only powerful country. Of course, it is the second most powerful country in the world, but it is also the only country that has not only envisioned but also successfully brought two parties that were seen to be as, rivals indefinitely together to be able to see each other differently. What followed after that, which is also very important, is that in June, Mahmoud Abbas was in Beijing. And at that time, again, the government, the President Xi's administration, and he himself talked about the importance of the two-state solution, the importance of a peaceful settlement, peace talks, and also the economic, the responsibility of the international community to focus on the economic construction and economic well-being of the people of Palestine. So this has been China's historic stance. And in this year in particular, we see that there was immense focus on this, even prior to this situation. And it is also important to know that it was expected for Benjamin Netanyahu to visit Beijing this year later, which hasn't happened yet, to continue that conversation. So for China to play a role of a peace and being a sort of a country that is using its diplomatic capacities, which China definitely has. China has a long history of relationships and now deepening ties, economic and in every other way strategic ties with Arab countries. China has a history of supporting the Palestinian cause, but China also is a country that has very pragmatic and growing cooperation in technology, science and technology, and other sectors with Israel as well. So when we think of a country, yes, that is critical of the Israeli position right now, that is sticking to the UN Charter and the international law, and that is it. That is the basis for us to gauge what is legal, what is acceptable, and what is not. And then now, being also what I feel is, the most likely country in and of itself that can potentially play that important role, which that Zhang Jun already is playing with, like backdoor channel diplomacy between the Israelis and Palestinians. So I think this summit, this meeting is significant, not only because it has happened, it is the first stop of the delegation led by the Saudi foreign minister, but also because real results can be expected. This is a country that has not picked.
When we talk about the Western members of the P5 after this particular outcome.
Yeah. So what we see is that also Xi Jinping and Emmanuel Macron already had a call where Macron supported the two-state solution. And again, that is and ceasefire. And that is also a positive development. So I think even Western leaders, firstly, as all of our other panelists have also mentioned, the real dynamics, it is very complex. There are domestic concerns that Western leaders have. There are miscalculations. Nobody expected perhaps the kind of bloodshed that's happened in Gaza. I do not think Western leaders were expecting that rate to be covered the way it is. But long story short, I mean, we see that that for Xi Jinping right now, and at any point, it is anyone who can play a conducive role in the process of pushing the collective commitment of the international community to support, to ensure a ceasefire, will be a welcome partner to have dialogue with. And that is a fact. Xi and Biden just met in California. They have discussed various issues on global governance, climate change. China is willing to talk to any partner that being if that can be conducive to pushing, to pressurizing the Israeli government to stop the bombardment and actually think of a long-term lasting solution. So this is important. And also you and our guests have also already mentioned the BRICS extraordinary meeting as well, where again, the same three commitments: we need immediate ceasefire, we need aid to go to Gazan people, we need a long-term solution, which is the two-state solution according to the 1967 borders.
These three proposals made by Mr. Xi Jinping on this extraordinary summit of the BRICS regarding the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Let me once again proceed towards Ms. Naela. Ms. Naela, now we clearly see a very leading role by China as far as resolving the regional conflicts is concerned. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement in the recent past also. Now, this particular push, the diplomatic push by that ministerial committee that has been mandated by Arab Islamic Summit, the kind of statements we have seen from the Chinese officials, what sort of impetus, the kind of position Muslim countries carry regarding the situation in Gaza at this point in time has given, and what's there for the Western countries who are the members of the P5 to learn from it?
Well, you see, As I understand, they are going to meet all the P5 member countries. They started with China, then the next visit will be to Moscow, and then they'll be visiting other capitals of the P5 member countries. This is a very proactive diplomacy to reach to, to pressurize Israel from, its aggression and to accept ceasefire. Already you can see France's position has shifted. Earlier on, Mr. Macron had gone to Israel and had extended his support. But after all the rallies that came out in Paris, they even voted in favor of the resolution. They didn't abstain from it. And they have now started saying that yes, ceasefire, humanitarian ceasefire is imperative. Furthermore, if this delegation also visits all these countries, then it will put further pressure. So, if all the P5 agree not to close their eyes on Israel's aggression, then probably you could have a more tangible and more substantive resolution there.
So, do you expect any sort of a different sort of an adoption of a resolution after this process of this ministerial committee completing its tour of meeting the P5 officials?
Let's see how they work it out, because at this moment, as I said before, it's very fluid. One cannot say in hard and fast terms how it will play out, but definitely Israel is being forced from outside and inside to stop this Israeli, Netanyahu's regime is being pressurized. So one is optimistic that ceasefire will take place. For what duration? It's difficult to say.
Okay, so now,
Two-nation state is very important. Whether Israel will accept it and allow it, and to what will be the mechanism of the new Palestine state, even if they agree to it, is also a very challenging topic.
Right, Mr. Jawad, what's your understanding? What's your expectation when we talk about if the United Nations Security Council meets for the next time after this particular diplomatic push by this ministerial committee of the Muslim countries is completed? Do you expect any sort of different outcome that time?
So far what we've seen is that initially all the Western countries, they had a position which was coordinated and coalesced in one direction. But gradually they have been sort of coming up with a more nuanced perspective, if not a clear position. Now with this type, and I actually had called for this type of an initiative long before. Probably it should have taken place a few weeks earlier. But it's never too late, as they say. I think in the UN what we will see is the US, of course it has the veto power, and it has been consistently using that veto power for Israel over the years and decades, So that is not likely to change. I think what could happen is that as pressure increases upon the US within the United Nations Security Council, the US will put more pressure on Israelis to reach some sort of an understanding with Hamas in the back channel diplomacy. And then once that could be announced, then the pressure would lessen within the United Nations Security Council, or within that diplomacy that will take place, they might even agree upon some diluted resolution which might have the support of the US as well. So there could be these two outcomes. But an outright change in the US position is hard to envision at this point.
Right, Ms. Zoon, now talking about those three proposals made by Chinese President Xi Jinping, including a ceasefire release of the civilian detainees, and he's also said it is imperative to ensure safe and smooth passage of humanitarian relief. International community should take concrete actions to prevent the escalation of this particular conflict into a wider one. What practical steps ideally could China take in this regard to get the result of these proposals?
I think, firstly, I'm sorry if I was interrupting a few minutes ago, but we just have a latest development that Israel will allow 300 aid trucks to enter Gaza. and release 150 Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 50 hostages. This is just breaking news 2-3 minutes ago, reported by Haaretz, and I think other media will follow as well. So we see some development on that front. In terms of what can be expected, the statement by the outcome, the official release, the press release of the meeting with the Arab delegation, Arab and Muslim countries delegation, is one that is firstly completely in line with just China's stance that has been, two-state solution, dialogue, etc. This is the only way forward. This is the only lasting solution. But when it comes to what practical steps China is taking, I think China is already taking very significant practical steps, which we have discussed throughout this program. China is a country that has the ability, clearly. I mean, this development is quite significant. It is not sufficient, but it is significant as a push forward for those who are demanding ceasefire and an ease of the situation that Gazans find themselves in. And I think further what China can really do is push further, on the UN Security Council that they are going to be the presiding for this month, right? They can push through the UN platforms to further, use international law and the legal consensus that the international community has agreed to pressure Israel further. And again, like the phone call between President Xi and Emmanuel Macron, there can be similar, engagement of other Western leaders, especially the P5 members, who have a significant role to play for us to be able to actually see a ceasefire on the ground. These are the practical steps that can be
Research Fellow at the Center for China and Globalization. Thank you very much for being with us on Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. And in the studio, we were joined by Ms. Naela Chohan, former ambassador. Thank you very much for your time. Also, Mr. Johar Salim, former Foreign Secretary, also joining us in the studio. Thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Thank you very much for watching.